Hey guys, tonight we are mixing the fire. The castle walls are thick and the gates are strong, but a handful of this black dust can turn them all to rubble. We are joining the Medieval Gunpowder Maker. We are going to explore the dangerous chemistry that changed the world forever. This is a story about white crystals, yellow rocks, and black wood. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, smell the sulfur in the air, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The powder mill sits 3 leagues from the city walls, hidden deep in the forest where the oaks grow thick and twisted. You can smell it before you see it. That rotten egg stench carries on the wind, drifting through the branches, warning travelers to turn back. Sulfur, the devil's own perfume. It clings to your throat, makes your eyes water, settles into your clothes and hair until you cannot escape it. Even when you return home, your wife will smell it on you. Your children will wrinkle their noses. The dogs will keep their distance. The path narrows as you approach. Moss grows thick on the north side of every trunk. Ferns carpet the forest floor, their fronds heavy with morning dew. The canopy above blocks out most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight that feels somehow appropriate for this work. This is not a place for bright days and clear skies. This is a place for shadows and secrecy. The first structure you encounter is the perimeter fence. Rough-hewn logs driven deep into the earth, lashed together with thick rope. No nails, no iron anywhere near this place. Iron makes sparks, sparks make fire, fire makes death. The gate stands open during working hours, but at night it is barred with a heavy wooden beam that takes 2 men to lift, not that anyone would want to enter after dark. The powder mill sleeps fitfully, groaning and settling like an old man with bad joints. Beyond the fence, the compound spreads out in careful isolation. Each building sits apart from its neighbors, separated by earth berms and stone walls. If one structure explodes, the others might survive. Might. It is a hope more than a certainty. The master powder maker has seen 3 mills in his lifetime. This is his fourth. He does not speak of the others. The main mill building hunkers low against the ground, its roof covered with thick sod to dampen any potential blast. Smoke rises from a chimney at the far end, not the black smoke of burning wood, but the white steam of boiling water. Always boiling, always dissolving and crystallizing and filtering. The work never truly stops. Even when the mill is quiet, something is processing, something is heating, something is waiting to be ground or mixed or tested. The walls are thick timber, each beam notched and fitted without a single nail. Wooden pegs hold everything together. The door hangs on leather hinges, supple and strong, replaced twice a year before the leather can dry and crack. Everything that might cause a spark has been banished. The workers wear leather shoes with wooden soles. Their tools are wood and stone and copper. Even their belt buckles are carved from horn. Inside, the air is thick and heavy. The smell intensifies. Sulfur, yes, but also the acrid bite of saltpeter, the dusty sweetness of charcoal, and underneath it all, the sharp metallic tang of fear. Every man who works here knows he is dancing with death. One careless moment. One static spark from wool rubbing on wool. One grain of sand in the mortar that creates a tiny friction point. The powder is patient, but it does not forgive. The floor is packed earth, swept clean a dozen times each day. No dust can be allowed to accumulate, no grit, no debris. The broom itself is special, made from soft willow branches bound to a smooth handle. The workers sweep in long, gentle strokes, never raising dust, always gathering it toward the door where it can be carefully collected and burned in a controlled fire, pit well away from the mill. Light enters through windows covered with old parchment, not glass. Glass can shatter and create sparks against stone. The parchment glows with a warm amber light that makes everything inside look ancient and holy, like the illuminated pages of a monastery manuscript. But there is nothing holy about this work. This is alchemy of the most dangerous kind. This is stealing fire from the gods and grinding it into a fine black powder that can be measured and sold and used to bring down castle walls. The master sits at a wooden table near the window, his fingers stained yellow and black. He's weighing ingredients on a balance scale, adding tiny pinches of material to copper pans that hang from braided horsehair cords. The scale is so sensitive that his breath can alter the reading. He holds himself very still. His apprentice stands behind him, watching, learning, memorizing the proportions that have been passed down through generations of powder makers. 75 parts saltpeter, 15 parts charcoal, 10 parts sulfur. These numbers are burned into their minds like brands. They dream them at night. They whisper them in their sleep. But before any weighing can begin, before any mixing or grinding or testing, the raw materials must be gathered and prepared. This is where our story truly begins, in the stables and dovecotes, in the volcanic mountains far to the south, in the carefully tended coppices where specific trees are grown for a single purpose. The making of powder begins long before the powder itself exists. The saltpeter men rise before dawn. They carry wooden shovels and leather bags and copper scrapers. Their work takes them to the filthiest places in the kingdom. Stables where horses have stood for years, their urine soaking deep into the packed earth floor. Dovecotes where thousands of birds roost and defecate, layer upon layer of white droppings building up like snowdrifts in winter. Pigsties and cattle barns and chicken coops. Anywhere that animals concentrate their waste. Anywhere that urine and excrement and time have created the white magic. They enter the stable in the grey pre-dawn light. The horses shift and stamp, nervous at these early visitors. The smell is overwhelming. Ammonia burns the nostrils. The sweet-sour stench of fermenting hay and manure makes the eyes water. But underneath it all, if you know what to seek, there is something else. A mineral smell, clean and sharp despite the filth surrounding it. This is the smell of saltpeter beginning to bloom. The head saltpeter man kneels and examines the floor. He has done this for 30 years. His father did it before him, his grandfather before that. The knowledge has been passed down like a family recipe, refined through generations of observation and failure and occasional success. He knows which stables produce the best saltpeter, which animals, which bedding, which drainage. It is an art as much as a science. He scrapes at the packed earth with a copper blade. The surface layer is fresh manure and soiled straw. This goes aside. Beneath that is older material, compressed and blackened. This too is set aside. But deeper still, where the earth has been soaked for years with urine, where the ammonia has reacted with the minerals in the soil and the calcium from the limestone foundations, here the magic lives. The earth here is different. It feels greasy between the fingers. It has a crystalline texture, tiny white specks visible even in the dim light. When he touches his tongue to it, there is a cooling sensation, a faint saltiness that is not quite salt. This is it. This is the earth that will yield the white snow, the Chinese snow, the saltpeter. They dig carefully, filling the leather bags with this precious contaminated soil. Each stable might yield 3 or 4 bags. A large barn with decades of accumulated waste might provide enough raw material to produce 100 pounds of refined saltpeter. But the process is slow. The process is laborious. The process cannot be rushed. The bags are loaded onto a wooden cart. No iron fittings on the axles. Wooden wheels with leather wrappings. Even the draft horse's shoes have been removed, replaced with leather boots that protect the hooves without risking sparks on stone roads. The cart creaks and groans as they make their way back to the mill, following narrow forest paths that keep them away from the main roads. This cargo is too valuable and too dangerous to risk casual observation. At the mill, the extraction begins. This is where dirt becomes treasure, where filth becomes the foundation of empires. Large wooden vats stand in a row, each one the size of a man. They are filled with water from the nearby stream, cold and clear, flowing down from the mountains where no humans live and no animals graze. Pure water, essential water. The quality of the water determines the quality of the final product. The saltpeter earth is added to the vats, one bag at a time. The workers stir with long wooden paddles, working the soil into the water, breaking up clumps, ensuring every particle makes contact with the dissolving liquid. The water begins to turn brown, then black, thick with suspended dirt and organic material. But somewhere in that murky soup, invisible and dissolved, the saltpeter molecules are floating free, separated from the earth that held them for so long. They stir for an hour, 2 hours, three. The motion must be constant but gentle. Too vigorous and they will create foam, trap air, make the separation more difficult. Too gentle and the extraction will be incomplete. The senior workers have a rhythm, a cadence like monks chanting prayers. The paddles move in slow circles, round and round, hypnotic and endless. Then the waiting begins. The vats are left to settle overnight. The heavy particles of soil and manure sink to the bottom, forming a thick sludge. The lighter organic matter floats to the top, creating a brown scum that must be carefully skimmed away. But in the middle, in the zone between sinking and floating, the liquid holds the dissolved saltpeter, invisible but present, waiting to be revealed. In the morning they return. The liquid has cleared somewhat, though it still holds a brownish tint. Carefully, using copper ladles with long handles, they transfer the liquid from the middle zone into clean vats, leaving the settled sludge behind. This is the first filtering. More will follow. The liquid is poured through layers of fabric, old linen sheets worn soft from years of washing, perfect for catching the fine particles that still float suspended. The cloth hangs in wooden frames, and the liquid drips through slowly, one drop at a time, gathering in clean copper pots beneath. This takes hours, sometimes days. Patience is the saltpeter maker's greatest virtue. Patience and an acceptance of the smell that never quite leaves your clothes or skin or hair. Once filtered, the liquid looks clearer, almost clean, but it still holds impurities, calcium compounds, magnesium salts, organic residues that resist filtering. These must be removed or the final powder will be weak, will absorb moisture, will fail at the crucial moment when a cannon needs to fire or a mine needs to explode. More vats, more water. The solution is diluted and allowed to settle again. The impurities precipitate out, forming crystals that are not saltpeter that must be discarded. The liquid above is transferred to yet another vat, filtered again, diluted again, settled again. This cycle repeats until the master is satisfied that the solution is pure enough to proceed to the final stage. Now comes the transformation. The invisible becomes visible. The dissolved becomes solid. This is crystallization, the moment when all the days of digging and stirring and filtering reveal their purpose. Large copper kettles are filled with the purified solution. These kettles are special, made by craftsmen who understand that any flaw in the metal, any thin spot or crack, could lead to disaster later when explosive powder is being mixed in these same vessels. The copper is thick and smooth, polished to a warm glow that reflects the firelight. The kettles are set over carefully controlled fires, not too hot. The liquid must boil gently, steadily, with no violent bubbling that might splash the precious solution or cause uneven heating. The workers feed the fires with selected wood, pieces that have been dried for months in covered sheds. Damp wood creates uneven heat. Green wood pops and sparks. Only perfectly seasoned wood will do. The liquid begins to steam. White vapor rises and dissipates in the mill's ventilation system, a clever arrangement of baffles and channels that draws the humid air up and out through roof vents, preventing condensation from dripping back down onto the work surfaces below. The vapor carries away water, leaving behind an increasingly concentrated solution of saltpeter. The master checks the progress every hour. He uses a clean copper rod to extract a small sample, which he places on a cool stone slab. As it cools, he watches how the liquid behaves. Does it remain liquid, too dilute? Does it form a thick syrup, getting close? Does it begin to show tiny white crystals forming at the edges? Perfect. Time for the next step. The fire is reduced. The solution must cool slowly, giving the saltpeter molecules time to find each other, to link up in the precise geometric patterns that create the long white crystals prized by powder makers everywhere. Too fast, and the crystals will be small and powdery, difficult to work with. Too slow, and impurities might co-crystallize, contaminating the final product. As the temperature drops, the magic begins. At first, nothing seems to happen. The liquid sits still and clear in the copper kettle. But then, if you look carefully, you can see tiny white specks forming on the bottom. They appear like stars emerging at dusk, one by one, then more and more until the bottom of the kettle is covered with a white frost of microscopic crystals. These crystals grow. Slowly, incrementally, they add molecule after molecule, building themselves into beautiful geometric structures. The workers peer into the kettle as if looking into a scrying bowl, watching the white snow accumulate. This is why the Arabs called it Chinese snow. This is why the Europeans thought it magical. From filth and dirt and animal waste, beauty emerges, order from chaos. The white snow of China, growing in a copper kettle in a forest mill thousands of miles from the Silk Roads. The crystals form as long needles, translucent white, catching and reflecting the lamplight. They cluster together in radiating patterns, like frost on a window pane, like stars in a constellation. Each cluster grows until it meets its neighbors, and eventually the entire bottom of the kettle is covered with a thick crust of white saltpeter crystals. The liquid above the crystals is carefully poured off. It still contains dissolved saltpeter, but at a lower concentration. It will be returned to the kettle and boiled down again, producing a second crop of crystals. Nothing is wasted. The margins in this business are too thin to allow waste. The crystals are lifted from the kettle using copper scrapers. They make a soft, crunching sound, like walking on fresh snow. The workers transfer them to clean wooden trays lined with linen, where they will dry in the air for several days. The drying must be complete. Any remaining moisture will ruin the powder, causing it to clump and absorb more moisture from the air until it becomes a useless cake that will not ignite. As the crystals dry, they lose their translucent quality and become opaque white. They look like large grains of sugar or coarse salt. When you pick up a crystal and rub it between your fingers, it feels cool and smooth, with a slippery, almost soapy texture. If you touch it to your tongue, it tastes faintly salty and cool, with a slight bitterness underneath. This cooling sensation is characteristic. This is how you know the saltpeter is pure. The dried crystals are weighed and recorded in the master's ledger. Each batch is noted with the date, the source of the earth, the number of filterings, any unusual observations. This record keeping is essential. When a batch of powder performs poorly, the master can trace back through his notes to find the cause. Was the saltpeter from a particular stable inferior? Did a specific batch require fewer filterings? The knowledge accumulates like the crystals themselves, slowly building over years and decades. The saltpeter is stored in wooden barrels in a dry room at the back of the mill. The barrels are sealed with wax around the lids to prevent moisture intrusion. Each barrel is labeled with its batch number and date. The oldest saltpeter is used first, following a strict rotation. Fresh saltpeter is considered slightly superior, as any saltpeter stored for more than a year begins to absorb atmospheric moisture no matter how well sealed the container. But saltpeter alone cannot make powder. It is the heart, yes, the oxidizer that provides the oxygen needed for rapid combustion. But the heart needs fuel to burn. This is where the sulfur enters our story. The yellow stone, the brimstone of biblical fire and damnation, the element that smells like hell itself. The sulfur comes from far away, from volcanic regions in Sicily and southern Italy, where the earth still remembers ancient fires. There are mountains there that steam and smoke, where hot springs bubble up with water that smells of rotten eggs, where yellow deposits accumulate in thick seams and veins. This is where the sulfur is mined. The miners are a special breed. They work in conditions that would break most men. The volcanic caves are hot, sometimes unbearably so. Water drips from the ceilings, acidic and burning to the skin. The air is thick with sulfur dioxide, a gas that chokes the lungs and burns the throat. The miners wear cloth masks soaked in vinegar, but even these provide only minimal protection. They work in short shifts, rushing out to breathe fresh air before returning to hack away at the yellow stone. The sulfur deposits form in layers and pockets, sometimes pure yellow, sometimes mixed with grey stone and white gypsum. The purest sulfur is bright yellow, the color of fresh lemons, with a slightly greasy sheen when freshly broken. It is surprisingly soft. You can scratch it with a fingernail. It breaks with a conchoidal fracture, like glass, creating sharp edges that glitter in the lamplight. The miners use copper picks and wooden hammers. Iron tools are forbidden here too, not because of explosion risk, but because iron contaminates the sulfur, and contaminated sulfur makes inferior powder. They pry loose chunks and fragments, loading them into leather baskets that are hauled up to the surface on ropes. At the surface, the sulfur is sorted. The purest yellow pieces are set aside for the powder makers. Darker material, contaminated with rock and mineral impurities, goes to other users. Sulfur has many applications: bleaching cloth, treating skin diseases, fumigating ships, making sulfuric acid for the alchemists and natural philosophers. But the powder makers pay the highest prices and demand the highest quality. They get first choice. The sulfur is transported in wooden barrels, packed carefully with straw to prevent the fragile chunks from breaking into powder during the journey. The barrels are loaded onto ships and carried north across the Mediterranean, up the Atlantic coast, then overland on the same carefully managed carts that carry the saltpeter earth. The journey takes weeks, sometimes months, depending on weather and the season. When the sulfur arrives at the mill, it is unpacked and examined. The master breaks open a few chunks, inspecting the fresh yellow surfaces for any signs of contamination. Pure sulfur should be uniformly yellow throughout, with no grey streaks or white spots. He heats a small piece on a copper spoon over a candle flame. Pure sulfur melts easily, becoming a dark red liquid that flows like honey. When removed from the heat, it solidifies quickly, forming a hard, brittle mass. If impurities are present, the melting behavior changes. The master has done this test thousands of times. He knows exactly what to look for. Approved sulfur is stored in a separate building, away from the saltpeter and especially away from the charcoal. Sulfur mixed with charcoal can ignite spontaneously under certain conditions. The reaction is slow but inevitable if the materials are stored in contact. Everything must be kept separate until the final mixing. This is an iron law of the powder mill. When it is time to prepare sulfur for powder making, the chunks must be ground to a fine powder. This is delicate work. Sulfur is brittle and breaks easily, but it must be ground very fine, finer even than the saltpeter. The particle size affects how thoroughly the three components mix, and thorough mixing is essential for consistent powder quality. The grinding is done in a stone mortar, a massive thing carved from a single piece of granite, sitting on a sturdy wooden table that has been reinforced to support the weight. The mortar is smoothly polished inside, with no rough spots or cracks where powder might lodge and accumulate. The pestle is also stone, worn smooth from years of use, fitting the mortar's curve perfectly. A worker takes a piece of sulfur, no larger than a walnut, and places it in the mortar. He begins to grind, using a circular motion, pressing the pestle down and rotating it steadily. The sulfur crackles and crunches under the pressure. The sound is distinctive. Sharp cracks as the brittle material fractures, followed by a softer grinding as the pieces become smaller. The smell intensifies. Each broken surface releases sulfur vapor. The worker's eyes water. He breathes shallowly through his mouth, trying to minimize the acrid gas entering his lungs. The grinding continues. The pieces become granules. The granules become grit. The grit becomes powder. The worker pauses frequently to scrape the sulfur dust from the sides of the mortar back into the center. Nothing can be wasted. Every grain is precious. The yellow powder accumulates at the bottom of the mortar, fine and light, almost fluffy in texture. When the powder is fine enough, it is transferred to a copper sieve. The mesh is made from woven horsehair, incredibly fine, each strand precisely placed. The sieve is shaken gently over a clean wooden tray. The finest powder falls through, accumulating in a perfect yellow pile. Larger particles are caught in the mesh and returned to the mortar for additional grinding. This process repeats. Grind, sieve, return coarse particles, grind again. It takes an hour to produce a single pound of powder-fine sulfur. A batch of gunpowder might require 10 pounds. That is a full day of grinding for one worker. But the rhythm of the work is almost meditative. The circular motion of the pestle, the soft hiss of powder falling through the sieve, the sulfur smell becoming familiar, almost comfortable, like an old friend who always smells bad but is welcome nonetheless. The finished sulfur powder is stored in sealed copper jars. Each jar holds exactly 1 pound, weighed precisely on the master's balance scale. The jars are labeled and dated, kept in the same dry storage room as the saltpeter, but on opposite sides of the room with a brick wall between them. Segregation, separation. These are the mantras of safety in the powder mill. Now we come to the third component, the fuel that will feed the fire. The carbon that will burn with the sulfur, consuming the oxygen provided by the saltpeter, creating the massive volume of hot gas that gives gunpowder its power. This is charcoal, but not just any charcoal. Not the heavy black lumps that blacksmiths use or that housewives burn in their cooking fires. This must be special charcoal, made from specific woods in a specific way. The wood must be light and soft. Willow is ideal. Alder is acceptable. Some powder makers swear by dogwood or buckthorn, but never oak, never ash or beech or any of the hard woods. Hard woods make dense charcoal that burns too slowly. The particles are gritty and hard, difficult to grind fine. Soft wood makes soft charcoal, light and fluffy, easy to pulverize, quick to ignite. The charcoal makers work in the forest near the mill. They maintain coppiced groves where willow trees are cut back every few years, allowing new growth to spring from the old stumps. The young branches are perfect, straight and uniform, 3 to 4 years old, about as thick as a man's thumb. They are harvested in late winter when the sap is down and the wood is driest. The branches are cut to uniform lengths, about 2 feet long. The bark is peeled away, a tedious process that leaves the white wood exposed. Some powder makers insist that the bark must be removed before charring. Others claim it makes no difference. The master at our mill follows his master's teaching, which followed his master's teaching, and so the bark is removed. It is tradition. It is ritual. It is what has always been done. The prepared branches are stacked carefully in a charcoal clamp. This is a mound built on level ground, starting with a center pole around which the wood is arranged in a tight cone. The branches stand upright, leaning against each other, packed closely but with small gaps for air flow. Layer upon layer is added until the pile is 6 feet tall and 8 feet across at the base. Then the entire structure is covered with damp leaves and earth, creating an airtight seal with only a few small vent holes at the top and bottom. The clamp is ignited through a hole at the top, using a long pole with burning straw tied to the end. The fire must be carefully managed. The goal is not to burn the wood to ash, but to drive off the volatile compounds, leaving behind pure carbon. This requires heat but limited oxygen. Too much air and the wood burns completely, leaving only white ash. Too little air and the process stalls, leaving partially charred wood that is useless for powder making. Smoke begins to pour from the vents. At first it is white and thick, laden with water vapor and wood vinegar and tar vapors. The smell is sharp and acidic, making the eyes water. This is the wood being baked, its cellular structure breaking down, its moisture evaporating. The smoke carries away everything that is not carbon. After several hours, the smoke changes. It becomes thinner and bluish with a different smell, less acidic, more burnt. This is a good sign. The volatiles are mostly gone. The charcoal is forming, but the process must continue. Rushing now would ruin the entire batch. The charcoal burner stays with the clamp for 3 days and 3 nights. He monitors the vents, adjusting them to control airflow. He watches the smoke, reading its color and density like a fortune teller reads tea leaves. He feels the surface of the clamp with his bare hands, checking for hot spots that might indicate too much combustion or cool spots that might indicate the fire has gone out. This is a skill passed down through generations. You cannot learn it from books. You must stand beside a master and watch and feel and smell, and eventually understand through some instinct that lives in the blood and bones. When the smoke finally stops, the vents are sealed completely. The clamp must cool slowly, starved of oxygen, preventing the charcoal from igniting and burning away. This cooling takes days, a week sometimes. The charcoal burner checks daily, feeling the earth with his hand, waiting for the heat to dissipate. When the clamp is finally cool, it is carefully opened. The earth and leaves are raked away, revealing the charcoal within. It is beautiful in its way. The branches have retained their shape, but they are now black and light, transformed into pure carbon. When you pick up a piece, it weighs almost nothing. It feels brittle, ready to crumble at the slightest pressure. But it must not crumble yet, not until it reaches the grinding tables at the mill. The charcoal is loaded into barrels, packed loosely with straw to prevent breakage during transport. The barrels are carried to the mill and stored in yet another separate building. 3 components, 3 storage buildings, 3 potential disasters kept safely apart until the moment of controlled mixing. When it is time to prepare charcoal for powder making, the pieces are inspected. The master breaks a few open, examining the cross-sections. Good charcoal shows the original wood structure preserved in carbon. You can see the growth rings, the cellular pattern, all transformed to black but still visible. The charcoal should be uniformly black throughout, with no brown areas that indicate incomplete charring. The texture is crucial. The master rubs a piece between his fingers. It should leave a velvety black mark, smooth and soft, not gritty. He places a piece on his tongue. It should feel silky, almost dissolving on contact with moisture. This is the test that matters. Silky charcoal makes superior powder. Gritty charcoal makes inferior powder that is harder to ignite and produces less power. The grinding of charcoal is the easiest of the 3 components, but it must still be done with care. The same stone mortar and pestle are used, but they have been thoroughly cleaned after the sulfur grinding, washed with water and dried in the sun. Even a trace of sulfur mixed into the charcoal at this stage could cause problems during the final mixing. A worker places a stick of charcoal into the mortar. With the first press of the pestle, it disintegrates into large chunks. A few more rotations and it becomes granular. A few more and it is powder, black as midnight, so fine it floats on the air like smoke. The worker must be careful not to breathe deeply. Charcoal dust in the lungs can cause problems, blackening the sputum, irritating the airways. The charcoal powder is sieved through the same horsehair screens used for the sulfur. The finest powder passes through easily. The charcoal is so light, so insubstantial, that it seems to have no weight at all. When you pour it from one container to another, it flows like black water, catching the light, revealing subtle shades of gray within the deep black. This powder too is stored in copper jars, 1 pound each, labeled and dated. The jars of charcoal sit on shelves near the jars of sulfur, but not touching, never touching. Even accidental contact must be avoided. The powder maker's paranoia is justified by long experience. The graveyards are full of men who took shortcuts or ignored precautions. Now all 3 components are ready, 3 separate powders, white saltpeter, yellow sulfur, black charcoal, the trinity of destruction, the combination that has changed warfare forever. But they are still separate, still safe. The next step, the mixing, is where art meets danger, where precision meets volatility, where everything we have described so far comes together in a process that cannot tolerate error. The mixing room is at the far end of the mill, separated by thick walls from the grinding and storage areas. If an explosion occurs here, the walls should contain most of the blast, protecting the stored materials and preventing a catastrophic chain reaction that would destroy the entire facility. Should. The theory is comforting. The reality is less certain. The room contains a single large table, smooth and level, made from thick oak planks. The surface has been polished by thousands of hours of mixing, creating a sheen that reflects the lamplight. Around the table are stools for the workers, positioned so they can reach the center easily. Everything in this room has been designed for maximum efficiency and safety. The master consults his ledger. He has calculated the proportions exactly. For this batch, he will make 10 pounds of powder. That requires 7.5 pounds of saltpeter, 1.5 pounds of charcoal, and 1 pound of sulfur. These proportions are sacred. 75, 15, 10. They have been refined over centuries of trial and error, experimentation and disaster. Increasing the saltpeter makes the powder more powerful but harder to ignite. Increasing the charcoal makes it easier to ignite but less powerful. Increasing the sulfur lowers the ignition temperature but can make the powder unstable. The balance is critical. The jars are brought to the mixing room one at a time. First, the saltpeter. The master opens the lid and pours the white crystals onto the table in a neat pile. They clink softly as they fall, like tiny bells. He measures out exactly 7.5 pounds on his balance scale, returning any excess to the jar. The pile of saltpeter sits white and crystalline, waiting. Next, the charcoal. The black powder is poured onto the table in a separate pile, far from the saltpeter. If they were to accidentally mix at this stage, without proper grinding and incorporating, the result would be an inferior powder prone to separating back into its components. The charcoal pile looks like a small volcano, light and fluffy, a mound of the deepest black. Finally, the sulfur. The yellow powder joins the others, creating a third pile. Now the table holds three colors: white, black, yellow, the fundamental triad. The components that alone are merely interesting chemicals, but together become something transformative. The first mixing is done dry. The master uses a large wooden spatula, flat and smooth, to begin combining the materials. He starts by taking a small amount from each pile, mixing them in the center of the table. The colors swirl together. White and black create gray. Yellow tints it toward an olive tone. He works the spatula in figure-8 patterns, folding the powder over and over, ensuring even distribution. More material is added. The mixing continues. The pile grows larger, the colors becoming more uniform. The work requires patience and a delicate touch. Too vigorous and powder becomes airborne, wasted, and potentially dangerous. Too gentle and the mixing is incomplete, leading to pockets of pure components that will cause the powder to burn unevenly. After an hour of dry mixing, the pile has become a uniform olive gray color. The master takes a pinch and rubs it between his fingers, feeling for any grittiness that might indicate unmixed saltpeter crystals. He holds it up to the light, looking for any yellow specks of sulfur or black streaks of charcoal. It appears uniform, but appearances can deceive. The next step is crucial. The dry powder is transferred to a different table, one with a shallow rim around the edge to contain liquids. Here the powder will be moistened and worked into a paste. This accomplishes several goals. The moisture helps bind the components together. The paste can be pressed and formed, then dried and broken into grains of uniform size. And most importantly, wet powder cannot explode. For the next several hours, the work will be relatively safe. Water is added slowly, drop by drop, from a copper pitcher. Not much is needed. just enough to dampen the powder, turning it from a dusty mass into a thick paste. The master works the water in with his hands, kneading the mixture like bread dough. The paste is cool and slightly gritty, staining his hands a dark gray-green color that will not wash out for days. He kneads and folds, presses and rolls, working the paste for hours. This mechanical action serves multiple purposes. It further mixes the components at a molecular level. It breaks down any remaining crystals or lumps, and it begins to consolidate the mixture, creating a dense mass that will dry into a hard cake. The paste is formed into thick slabs, about 2 inches thick, and laid out on clean wooden boards to dry. The drying must happen slowly, in a controlled environment. Too fast and the surface will crack, creating weak points. Too slow and mold might begin to grow, contaminating the powder. The slabs are placed in a drying room with good air circulation, but no direct sunlight or heat sources. They will dry for several days. The master checks them daily, pressing a finger into the surface to test the consistency. At first, the paste is soft and yielding. After a day, it has firmed up but still feels damp. After 2 days, the surface is dry to the touch, but the interior remains soft. After 3 days, the slabs are hard throughout, though they still contain residual moisture. Now comes the grinding. Not the fine grinding we saw earlier with the individual components, but a breaking down of the hard cake into grains of specific sizes. The slabs are placed on a sturdy wooden table and attacked with wooden mallets, breaking them into chunks. The chunks are placed in a large wooden mortar, not the smooth stone mortar used for fine grinding, but a rougher wooden vessel with an iron-shard wooden pestle. Wait, iron. Yes, here iron is permitted, because the powder is still damp enough to be safe from sparks. The iron pestle can break down the chunks more efficiently than wood alone. The worker brings the pestle down in steady rhythm, crushing and breaking, turning large chunks into smaller ones. The broken powder is sieved through a series of screens, each with a different mesh size. The largest screen catches rocks and debris. The next screen separates the powder into coarse grains, about the size of peppercorns. These are called cannon powder, used for the largest guns. A finer screen produces medium grains, musket powder, the workhorse of the gunpowder world. The finest screen yields pistol powder, small grains that burn quickly and create high pressures in short barrels. The grains fall through the screens with a soft rattling sound, like rain on a roof, like seeds being poured from a bag. Each size is collected separately in wooden barrels, labeled according to grain size and batch number. The barrels are sealed and placed in the finished goods storage room, the final step before the powder leaves the mill and enters the world. But the work is not quite finished. Each batch must be tested. This is done on a proving ground well away from the mill buildings, in a clearing where trees have been cut back and the earth has been scraped bare. If something goes wrong during testing, the explosion should not reach the mill itself. The master brings a small sample of the fresh powder, carefully measured, along with his testing equipment. There is a heavy iron mortar, a miniature cannon essentially, fixed to a solid wooden table. There is a measured quantity of lead shot. There is a long fuse and a protected observation point behind an earthen berm. He loads the mortar carefully. First the powder, tamped gently into the chamber, then a wad of leather to hold it in place. Then the lead shot, precisely weighed. Everything must be standardized, repeatable, so that each test can be compared to previous tests and to established standards. The fuse is inserted, a slow-burning cord treated with saltpeter solution. The master lights it with a smoldering punk stick and walks quickly to the observation point. The fuse hisses and sparkles, eating its way down toward the powder chamber. There is time to think, time to regret, time to pray that the powder performs as expected and not catastrophically. The mortar fires with a sharp crack that echoes off the surrounding trees. Birds take flight from nearby branches. A cloud of white smoke rises from the mortar's mouth, acrid and thick, the unmistakable signature of gunpowder. The lead shot has been hurled out, flying across the clearing to strike a marked target board. The master emerges from cover and walks forward to inspect. First, he checks the mortar itself. Any cracks, any excessive heat. The iron should be warm but not dangerously hot. He examines the bore for residue. Good powder burns cleanly, leaving a light gray ash. Poor powder leaves thick black deposits that can foul the gun after repeated shots. Next, he walks to the target board. The lead shot has struck and left a dent. He measures the depth of penetration, comparing it to his records. This batch has performed within acceptable parameters. The powder is good. It can be released for sale. But not all batches pass the test. Sometimes the powder is too weak, the shot barely reaching the target. Sometimes it is too strong, the mortar showing signs of excessive stress. Sometimes it burns inconsistently, creating unpredictable results. These failures are recorded, the batches destroyed, the lessons learned. Powder making is not an exact science, despite all the careful measuring and controlled processes. There is still an element of art, of judgment, of instinct. Failed powder is not simply discarded. It can be dissolved back into water, separated into its components, and the saltpeter recovered and recrystallized. The charcoal and sulfur are lost, mixed with impurities and contaminants, but the expensive saltpeter can be saved. Nothing is wasted if it can be recovered. The margins are too thin, the work too difficult, the materials too precious. The master returns to the mill as evening approaches. The day's shift is ending. The workers clean their tools, sweep the floors one final time, and prepare to leave. They walk out through the gate in groups of 2 or 3, talking quietly amongst themselves. They do not discuss their work where others might hear. The knowledge of powder making is valuable and closely guarded. Other mills would pay well for secrets. Enemy kingdoms would pay even more. The master remains after the workers have gone. He makes a final tour of the compound, checking each building, ensuring all fires are banked, all tools properly stored, all materials secured. This is his mill, his responsibility, his life's work. If disaster strikes, it will be on his conscience as much as on his ledger. He pauses at the testing ground, looking at the scorch mark where the mortar fired. Tomorrow they will make more powder. Next week, they will receive an order from the king's armorer, requiring £1,000 for the army's needs. The month after that, a merchant vessel will dock carrying sulfur from Sicily and silver coin to pay for finished powder. The work continues, endless and essential. The smell of sulfur hangs in the evening air, that rotten egg stench that never quite leaves. The master no longer notices it consciously, though his wife still wrinkles her nose when he enters their home. His children have grown up with it. To them, their father simply smells like work, like the mill, like the smell that means food on the table and coins in the strongbox. He locks the gate, hanging the heavy beam in its brackets, testing it to ensure it is secure. The forest around the mill is growing dark. Shadows lengthen between the trees. Somewhere an owl calls, a mournful sound that seems appropriate to this place of sulfur and saltpeter and potential destruction. The master walks down the path toward the distant lights of the city. His day's work is done, but the mill never truly rests. Even now, in the cooling kettles, the last of today's saltpeter solution is crystallizing, forming white needles that will be harvested tomorrow. In the charcoal clamps in the forest, wood is slowly transforming to carbon, a process that takes days but cannot be rushed. In the stables and dovecotes across the kingdom, animals are depositing their waste, soaking it into the earth, beginning the long, slow process that will eventually yield more saltpeter. This is the cycle, the endless patient cycle of making powder from filth and stone and burned wood. Tomorrow will bring more of the same, digging and boiling and grinding and mixing, testing and measuring and recording, filling barrels and counting coins and wondering if this batch, this particular combination of materials prepared on this particular day, will perform as expected, or if it will be the one that fails at a crucial moment. The powder maker's art is ancient, yet the knowledge is always growing. Each batch teaches something new. Each failure reveals a variable that was not properly controlled. Each success confirms what has been learned. The craft advances incrementally, one small improvement at a time, built on the accumulated experience of generations. And always, there is the danger. The ever-present possibility that a spark will find powder, that friction will generate heat, that static electricity will jump from a wool sleeve to a copper scoop, that the guards of fire will claim their tribute. Every powder maker knows men who have died in explosions. Every mill has a graveyard nearby with more occupants than anyone wants to count. Yet the work continues because it must, because the world now runs on gunpowder. Castles cannot stand against it. City walls crumble before it. Armies armed with guns defeat armies armed with swords and spears. The balance of power has shifted, and powder makers like our master are the fulcrum on which history now turns. He reaches his home just as full dark falls. Lamplight glows in the windows. Smoke rises from the chimney, carrying the smell of cooking. His wife's cooking. Normal food smells. Bread and stew and herbs, not sulfur, not the acrid bite of saltpeter. Just home. Just the ordinary world that exists outside the mill's compound. He enters through the kitchen door, hanging his coat on a peg. His wife glances at him, says nothing about the smell, just ladles stew into a wooden bowl and sets it on the table. They have been married 20 years. She has long since stopped asking about his work. She knows enough to know she does not want to know more. He eats in silence, thinking about tomorrow's work. There are new saltpeter barrels that need to be opened and the contents inspected. There is a section of the mill's roof that needs repair before the autumn rains begin. There is an apprentice who shows promise but needs correction on his grinding technique. Always something to think about, to plan for, to worry over. After the meal, he sits by the fire with a cup of small beer, watching the flames dance and flicker. Fire is both his master and his servant. He controls it, uses it, makes it work for him. But he never forgets that fire is patient and opportunistic, always waiting for the moment when control slips, when attention wavers, when the inevitable disaster finally arrives. Tomorrow he will return to the mill before dawn. He will supervise the day's work, check the progress of various batches, make decisions about materials and processes and personnel. He will worry about quality and safety and profit margins. He will breathe sulfur fumes and taste saltpeter dust and wash charcoal stains from his hands. He will do this day after day, year after year, until age or accident ends his career. This is the life of the medieval gunpowder maker, not glorious, not celebrated in songs or poems, but essential. The man behind the curtain, the invisible hand that provides the power kingdoms depend on. Without him and his fellows, the castles would still stand impregnable. The old ways would still govern warfare. The future would look like the past. But with him, everything changes. Walls fall. Traditions crumble. The old certainties dissolve like saltpeter crystals in boiling water. And in their place, a new world emerges, one built on the power of three simple ingredients combined with skill and knowledge and courage. White saltpeter, harvested from filth and transformed through patience and craft. Yellow sulfur, mined from volcanic hell and ground to powder. Black charcoal, soft and silky, the burned ghost of willows and alders. Three substances that alone are merely interesting, but together create the power to reshape civilization. The fire burns low. The master's eyes grow heavy. Tomorrow will come early as it always does. The mill will wait, patient and dangerous, ready for another day of careful work and controlled danger. The powder must be made. The orders must be filled. The kingdom's security depends on it. He rises and climbs the stairs to his bedchamber. His wife is already asleep, her breathing soft and even. He undresses quietly and slides into bed beside her. She shifts slightly, but does not wake. He lies in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the wind in the trees outside, the distant bark of a dog. Sleep comes slowly. It always does. His mind continues working, reviewing the day, planning tomorrow, calculating proportions and wondering about that apprentice's grinding technique. The smell of sulfur has seeped so deeply into his skin and hair that he can detect it even now, faint but present, a reminder that he can never truly leave the mill behind. But eventually exhaustion wins. His breathing slows and deepens. His thoughts scatter and fade. And in the darkness of a medieval night, the powder maker sleeps, dreaming perhaps of white crystals forming in copper kettles, of yellow stone crumbling to dust, of black charcoal flowing like water through his fingers. Dreams of transformation, dreams of power, dreams of the dangerous alchemy that is his life's work. The mill itself does not sleep. In the darkness, chemical processes continue. The saltpeter solution still cooling in its kettles, molecules still finding each other and linking up in crystalline arrays. The charcoal clamps in the forest, still hot at their cores, still driving off volatiles, still transforming wood to carbon. Even the finished powder in its sealed barrels is not truly at rest. The molecules slowly rearranging themselves, absorbing tiny amounts of moisture from the air, aging and changing in ways too subtle to measure, but eventually significant. Everything is in motion. Everything is becoming. The world of the powder maker is a world of transformation, where dung becomes treasure, where three powders become one power, where human knowledge and skill can tame the forces that gods once claimed as their own exclusive domain. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and the workers return and the master unlocks the gate, it will all begin again, the cycle repeating, the ancient dance of creation and danger, the patient work of making fire from earth, of making power from filth, of making the future from the carefully mixed past. This is only part one of our story. We have seen how the raw materials are gathered and prepared. We have followed the saltpeter from stable floor to crystalline purity. We have traced the sulfur from volcanic mine to yellow powder. We have watched charcoal emerge from smoking clamps, black and light and perfect. We have witnessed the first steps of mixing, the careful combination of ingredients, the transformation of three separate substances into one compound mixture. But we have not yet seen the final steps. The most dangerous work still lies ahead. The incorporation, where damp powder is worked and pressed until the components are bound inseparably together. The corning, where hard cakes are broken into grains of precise size. The glazing, where the grains are tumbled with graphite to reduce dust and improve flow. The final testing, where powder meets fire and success or failure is measured in the velocity of lead shot and the integrity of iron barrels. These processes await us in part two, where the dangers multiply and the stakes rise higher, where a moment's inattention can mean death, where the powder maker's skill is tested in ways that determine not just the quality of the product, but the survival of the craftsman himself. But for now, let us rest with the master in his dark bedchamber, breathing the faint sulfur smell that never leaves, dreaming of white and yellow and black, of the three powders that together become the single most transformative substance of the medieval world. The gunpowder, the fire dust, the Chinese snow mixed with brimstone and burned willow, the substance that will reshape history, bring down kingdoms, and make the name of its makers both feared and sought after across the known world. Sleep now. Tomorrow the work continues. Tomorrow we will delve deeper into the mysteries and dangers of the powder maker's craft. Tomorrow we will see what happens when skill and knowledge face the ultimate test of fire. But tonight, in the darkness of a medieval world on the edge of transformation, let the sulfur smell fade, let the calculations and worries dissolve, let the images of white crystals and yellow powder and black charcoal drift into dreams. The mill waits. The powder waits. The future waits. And we will be there to witness it all. The morning arrives cold and grey, mist hanging between the trees like wet wool. The master walks the forest path again, his boots leaving dark prints in the dew-soaked earth. He carries his leather satchel with his scales and measures, his ledger wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from the damp. The smell of sulfur grows stronger as he approaches the mill compound, that familiar rotneg stench that marks his world. The gate stands as he left it, beam in place, everything secure. He lifts the heavy wood and swings the gate inward. The hinges creak softly, leather on wood, a sound he hears twice each day and barely notices anymore. Inside the compound, nothing has changed. The building sits silent and waiting. No smoke rises yet from the chimneys. The mill sleeps, but not for long. He unlocks the main building, pushing open the heavy door. The interior is dark and cool, holding the night's chill. He moves through the familiar space without hesitation, knowing where every beam and post stands, where each tool hangs, where the floor dips slightly near the east wall. He opens the shutters to let in the grey morning light, illuminating motes of dust that hang suspended in the air. The workers begin to arrive as the sun breaks through the mist. They come in twos and threes, walking up from the village, their breath visible in the cold air. Each man nods to the master as he enters, hanging his coat on the pegs by the door, rolling up his sleeves, preparing for the day's work. There is little conversation. These men have worked together for years. They know their tasks. They know the dangers. Today is mixing day. The components have been prepared, measured, inspected. The saltpeter sits in its jars, white and crystalline. The sulfur waits in its sealed containers, yellow and pungent. The charcoal rests in its barrels, black and impassably light. Today these three become one. Today the transformation reaches its critical stage. The master spreads a large piece of clean linen on the main work table. The fabric has been washed and dried in the sun, free from any grit or contamination. On this cloth, he will perform the most delicate operation in all of powder making, the initial mixing, the combining of ingredients that must be done with absolute precision. He opens his ledger to a fresh page, dipping his quill in iron gall ink. Today's date is recorded at the top. The batch number follows, a continuation of the sequence that stretches back years in previous ledgers. He notes the weather, the temperature as best he can judge it, the humidity that he feels in his bones more than measures with any instrument. All of these factors can affect the powder's quality in subtle ways. Now the weighing begins. This is where art meets science, where traditional proportions refined over centuries are translated into actual measured quantities. The master's brass scales sit on a stone pedestal, perfectly level, perfectly calibrated. The pans hang from braided horsehair cords, swaying gently with each breath of air. These scales can detect a difference of a single grain of wheat. For powder making, such precision is not luxury. It is survival. The weights are kept in a wooden box, each one carefully marked. There are large weights for pounds, smaller ones for ounces, tiny ones for drams and scruples. The brass has been polished smooth from years of handling. Each weight has been verified against the king's standard weights, certified accurate, marked with the royal seal. Proportions are sacred. 75 parts saltpeter, 15 parts charcoal, 10 parts sulfur. These numbers represent the accumulated wisdom of generations. Chinese alchemists discovered gunpowder centuries ago, but the exact proportions were refined through countless experiments, failures, and explosions. Too much saltpeter, and the powder burns too hot, destroying gun barrels. Too little, and it barely ignites. Too much charcoal, and the powder is weak, creating more smoke than force. Too little, and combustion is incomplete. Too much sulfur, and the powder becomes unstable, corrosive, unpredictable. Too little, and ignition is uncertain. 75, 15, 10. The master has mixed hundreds of batches using these proportions. His master before him mixed thousands. The ratios are burned into memory, written in muscle and bone and blood. For today's batch, he will make 50 pounds of finished powder. This requires careful calculation. 50 pounds total means 37.5 pounds of saltpeter, 7.5 pounds of charcoal, and 5 pounds of sulfur. He writes these figures in his ledger, checking his arithmetic twice. Error here propagates through every subsequent step. He begins with the saltpeter. Opening one of the copper jars, he pours white crystals into the brass pan. They fall with a soft crystalline sound, like tiny chimes, piling up in a small mountain. He adds weight to the opposite pan, watching the balance beam carefully. The pans swing, seeking equilibrium, almost there. He adds another pinch of saltpeter. Too much. He removes a few crystals. The beam steadies, perfectly horizontal. Exactly 1 pound. This process repeats. Pour, weigh, adjust. Pour, weigh, adjust. Each pound is transferred to a clean wooden bowl once weighed. The work is meditative, rhythmic. There is no rushing this. Precision cannot be hurried. The saltpeter accumulates in the bowl, white and gleaming, until 37.5 pounds have been measured, and the bowl is nearly full. Next comes the charcoal. So light, so insubstantial. The black powder flows like smoke, barely registering weight on the scales. It takes what seems like half the bowl to equal 1 pound. The master works carefully, avoiding any sudden movements that might send charcoal dust into the air. Airborne particles settle on everything, contaminating the workspace, creating cleanup work later. 7.5 pounds measured and transferred to a second bowl, leaving black stains on his fingers. Finally, the sulfur, yellow powder pouring from its jar, the smell intensifying as each pound is measured. His eyes water slightly, but he is so accustomed to the sensation that he barely notices. 5 pounds of sulfur join the other ingredients, sitting in a third bowl, sulfur yellow and pungent. Now the three components sit before him. White, black, yellow, separate, distinct, harmless in isolation. But combined, mixed thoroughly, they become something entirely different, something powerful, something dangerous. The traditional mixing begins on the linen-covered table. The master creates 3 separate piles, spacing them well apart. The saltpeter forms the largest pile by far, a white mountain dominating the workspace. The charcoal creates a smaller black volcano beside it. The sulfur makes the smallest pile, yellow and compact. He picks up his wooden spatula, a tool he has used for so many years that the handle fits his hand perfectly, worn smooth by constant contact. The mixing must be thorough but gentle. Too vigorous and dust rises into the air. Too gentle and the components do not integrate properly. He begins by taking small amounts from each pile, combining them in the center of the table. The colors swirl and merge. White and black create gray. The yellow sulfur tints the mixture toward olive. He folds the powder over itself, using the flat blade of the spatula to press and spread, press and spread. The motion is like a baker working dough, but infinitely more delicate. More material is incorporated. The central pile grows while the component piles shrink. The master works steadily, unhurried, watching the colors blend. An apprentice stands nearby, observing every movement, memorizing the technique. This is how the knowledge passes down, not through written instructions, though those exist, through watching, through feeling, through developing an instinct for the work. After 30 minutes, the 3 piles have become one. The powder is a uniform gray-green color, no streaks of black, no patches of white, no yellow specks visible. But the master is not satisfied. He continues mixing, folding, and spreading, ensuring complete integration at a microscopic level. The components must be so thoroughly combined that no separation can occur later. An hour passes, then another. The mixing continues. The master's arms grow tired, but his motion remains steady. This is no time for fatigue to introduce error. Finally, after nearly 3 hours of continuous mixing, he is satisfied. The powder is as uniform as dry mixing can achieve. But dry mixed powder is not finished powder. It is merely the first step. The components are combined, yes, but they are not bound together. If this powder were placed in a gun and fired, it would burn inconsistently. Some portions would ignite while others would not. The three components have different densities, different particle sizes. During transport or storage, they would separate like oil and water, with the heavy saltpeter settling to the bottom, the light charcoal rising to the top, the sulfur somewhere between. This is why incorporation is necessary. The powder must be wetted, worked into a paste, the components physically bound together so they cannot separate. Only then will the powder burn uniformly, predictably, with the controlled violence that makes it useful. The master transfers the dry mixed powder to a large wooden bowl, almost like a bread-making trough, but deeper and reinforced with copper bands. An apprentice brings a ceramic jug filled with liquid. Not water, though water could be used. Today they will use dilute alcohol, wine that has been distilled to increase its strength, then diluted again to about the concentration of strong beer. The alcohol serves multiple purposes. It wets the powder without dissolving the saltpeter as pure water might. It evaporates more quickly than water during drying, speeding the process. And it has the psychological effect of making the workers feel slightly safer. Wet powder cannot explode, and alcohol-wet powder feels especially safe, though in truth it is the moisture content that matters, not the type of liquid. Some powder makers use urine instead of alcohol. Human urine, aged for several weeks until it becomes alkaline and pungent. The urea and ammonia in aged urine are said to improve the powder's performance, helping to bind the components. The master tried this method once years ago, following the recommendation in an old manuscript. The powder performed well, but the smell during processing was unbearable. The workers complained. He returned to using alcohol and never regretted the decision. The alcohol is poured slowly onto the powder, a thin stream wetting the gray-green mass. The master works it in with his bare hands, kneading and folding. The powder begins to clump, forming a coarse, damp mass. More alcohol is added. The consistency changes, becoming more cohesive, more paste-like. He kneads the paste like a baker kneading dough, pressing with the heels of his hands, folding the mass over itself, rotating the bowl to reach all portions. The paste is cool and slightly gritty, staining his hands a dark greenish-gray that will not wash clean for days. His wife has long since given up trying to get his hands truly clean. The stains are permanent, layered one upon another, a record written in skin of years spent handling powder. The kneading continues for an hour. The paste becomes smoother, more uniform in texture. When he presses a thumb into it, the depression holds its shape. When he pulls a portion away from the mass, it stretches slightly before breaking. This is the correct consistency. Not too wet, which would take too long to dry. Not too dry, which would crumble rather than form a cohesive paste. But hand kneading, though traditional and effective, is limited. The paste can be worked into a uniform consistency, but it cannot be truly incorporated at the deepest level. For that, mechanical force is needed. For that, the edge runner must be employed. The edge runner sits in a separate room, isolated from the rest of the mill by thick walls. It is the most dangerous piece of equipment in the entire facility, because here wet paste becomes something very close to finished powder. Here the margin of safety grows thinner. Here men have died when something went wrong. The device is simple in principle. A massive stone wheel, perhaps 4 feet in diameter and 8 inches thick, carved from a single piece of granite. The wheel is mounted on a wooden axle that extends through its center. This axle is connected to a long wooden beam, and this beam is connected to a horse walking in a circle outside the building. The wheel sits in a wooden trough, shallow and wide, also made from a single piece of wood, a massive section of oak hollowed out over many days of careful carving. The trough surface has been smoothed and polished by years of use. The stone wheel rolls around in this trough, crushing and grinding whatever lies beneath it. The master transfers the paste from the kneading bowl to the edge runner's trough, spreading it evenly across the bottom. It forms a layer perhaps 2 inches thick, grey-green and damp, waiting. He inspects the stone wheel carefully, looking for any cracks or chips that might have developed since the last use. A fragment of stone breaking off during operation could create a spark. A crack could lead to catastrophic failure of the wheel itself. Everything appears sound. He signals to the apprentice outside, who leads the horse forward. The beam begins to move. The axle turns. The stone wheel starts to roll. The sound is immense, a deep grinding rumble that seems to shake the earth. The stone wheel crushes into the paste, the enormous weight pressing the components together with thousands of pounds of force per square inch. The paste squeezes out from under the wheel, only to be crushed again as the wheel completes its circuit. Rumble, the wheel rolls forward. Squelch, the paste compresses. Rumble, the wheel continues around. Squelch, the cycle repeats. The master watches through a small window cut into the wall. He can observe the process without being in the room, maintaining some distance from the danger. The paste changes as the wheel works it. It becomes darker, denser. The individual grains of saltpeter are crushed. The charcoal particles are ground finer. The sulfur is distributed at a molecular level throughout the mass. The wheel rolls for an hour, then two. The horse plods in its endless circle, head down, steady and patient. The apprentice walks beside it, occasionally offering words of encouragement. The horse has done this work for 3 years. It knows the rhythm. It maintains a constant pace without urging. Inside the trough, the paste becomes something new. The components are now inseparably combined. You could not separate them again without dissolving the saltpeter in water and starting the entire process over. The powder has become integrated, incorporated, transformed from a simple mixture into a true compound. The master judges the process complete by the paste's appearance. It has a sheen now, a slight glassiness from the compression. When he stops the wheel and examines a sample, pressing it between his fingers, it feels dense and smooth, no grittiness, no sense of separate particles. It has become one substance. He signals to stop. The apprentice leads the horse to a halt. The wheel stops turning. Silence falls, almost shocking after hours of rumbling. The master enters the room cautiously, checking that everything has stopped moving. He uses a wooden scraper to gather the paste from the trough, transferring it to clean wooden trays. The paste is spread across the trays in layers about 1 inch thick. These trays will go to the drying room, where air circulation will slowly remove the alcohol. But first, one more critical step must be completed. The paste must be broken into grains. This is the corning process, and it transforms the powder from paste to something recognizable as gunpowder. The grains will have specific sizes, will flow freely, will ignite uniformly. But before the paste can be corned, it must reach the correct moisture content. Too wet and it will smear through the screens. Too dry and it will not break into grains, but into dust. The trays are placed in the drying room, a space with good air flow but no direct heat. Windows on opposite walls can be opened to create a cross breeze. The paste will dry naturally, slowly, over the course of several days. The master checks it every few hours, pressing a finger into the surface, judging the moisture content by feel. On the first day, the paste remains quite wet. It leaves a mark on his finger, still pliable, still soft. On the second day, the surface has dried, but the interior remains damp. The paste has begun to harden, but when broken, the interior reveals darker, still moist material. On the third day, the paste has achieved the perfect consistency. When broken, it crumbles into chunks, still holding together, but ready to be worked through screens. Now the corning can begin. This is perhaps the most satisfying part of the entire process. the transformation from formless paste to uniform grains, the creation of something that looks like gunpowder, that flows like gunpowder, that is finally recognizable as the finished product. The screens are made from parchment, treated leather stretched over wooden frames. The parchment has been pierced with holes of specific sizes, created with precise metal punches. Different screens produce different grain sizes. Large holes create cannon powder with grains the size of peas. Medium holes create musket powder, grains like grains of rice. Small holes create pistol powder, fine grains barely larger than sand. The master takes a handful of the dried paste and crumbles it over the coarsest screen. The material breaks into chunks, some small enough to fall through, others too large. He uses a wooden block to rub the chunks against the screen. The action is gentle but firm, a circular rubbing motion that forces the paste through the holes. The sound is incredible. A soft shhhh as the grains fall through the screen, then a rattle as they hit the wooden tray below. Shhhh. Rattle. Shhhh. The rhythm is hypnotic. He continues rubbing, working the paste through the screen, watching the grains accumulate below. Each grain emerges roughly spherical, though irregular, the size determined by the screen hole it passed through. The grains fall in a growing pile, dark grey-green, still slightly damp, but already beginning to look like proper gunpowder. The pile grows. Shhhh. Rattle. Shhhh. More grains falling, more paste being worked through. An apprentice takes over the rubbing, while the master prepares the next screen. The process will be repeated several times, each screen producing a different grade of powder. The coarsest grains are for cannons. These large grains burn relatively slowly, creating sustained pressure that can propel a heavy cannonball over long distances. Smaller grains for muskets burn faster, creating the quick burst of pressure needed in a shorter barrel. The finest grains for pistols burn almost instantaneously, creating very high pressures suitable for the shortest barrels. The rubbing continues for hours. The apprentice's arms grow tired, but the rhythm must be maintained. Too much pressure and the grains break apart, creating dust. Too little pressure and large chunks remain, unable to pass through the screen. The technique requires practice, sensitivity, a feel for the material. By late afternoon, several trays of grains sit on the work table, each tray holding a different size. The master inspects them, running his fingers through the grains, letting them flow like sand between his hands. They feel right. They look right, but they are not quite finished. The grains are still damp from the alcohol used during incorporation. They must dry completely before being stored. Any residual moisture will cause the powder to clump, to cake, to deteriorate over time. The trays are returned to the drying room, spread thinly to maximize air exposure. Another 2 days pass. The master checks the grains frequently, stirring them with his hands to expose all surfaces to the air. Gradually, the moisture evaporates. The grains become lighter, drier, more free-flowing. When he pours them from hand to hand, they make a soft, rattling sound, like rain on leaves, like seeds in a gourd. On the 5th day after corning, the powder is dry. The master performs the final test. He takes a small amount and presses it hard between his thumb and forefinger. Dry powder will crush into dust under this pressure. If it remains in grains or forms a cake, moisture is still present. The grains crush beautifully, confirming they are ready. But there is one more treatment that can improve the powder's quality. The grains are still rough-surfaced, with tiny projections and irregularities that create dust during handling. This dust is a problem. It can separate from the grains during transport. It makes the powder dirty to handle. It can absorb moisture preferentially. The solution is glazing. The grains are placed in a wooden barrel, not filled, but only about half full. A small amount of graphite powder is added, very fine, black and slippery. The barrel is sealed and placed on a rotating mechanism. two wooden rollers turned by the same horse-powered system that drives the edge runner. The barrel begins to rotate, tumbling the powder grains inside. The grains rub against each other, their rough surfaces wearing smooth. The graphite acts as a lubricant and a coating, filling the tiny irregularities, creating a smooth, glossy surface. The tumbling continues for hours, the barrel rotating endlessly, the grains polishing each other like river stones. The sound from inside the barrel changes as the process continues. At first there is a soft rattling, the grains moving against each other with friction. Gradually the sound becomes smoother, more flowing, like sand pouring. This is the grains becoming polished, their surfaces smoothing, the graphite coating them completely. After 6 hours of tumbling, the barrel is stopped and opened. The powder inside has been transformed. The grains are now smooth and glossy, black rather than gray-green, coated with a thin layer of graphite. They flow like liquid when poured, each grain sliding easily past its neighbors. When you run your hand through them, they feel silky, almost oily, though they leave no residue. This is finished gunpowder. This is the final product. Months of work condensed into these black grains. Saltpeter harvested from stable floors, crystallized through patient boiling and filtering. Sulfur mined from volcanic depths, ground to yellow powder. Charcoal created from willow branches, burned in oxygen-starved clamps. All three combined, wetted, incorporated, corned, dried, glazed. The powder is weighed carefully, recorded in the ledger. This batch has yielded 48 pounds of finished powder from 50 pounds of raw ingredients. The 2 pounds lost represent moisture evaporation and small amounts of material left on screens and in equipment. This is an acceptable yield. Some batches perform better, some worse, but 48 pounds from 50 is within normal parameters. Now the powder must be tested. Not merely fired in the proving mortar as before, but tested thoroughly to ensure it meets quality standards. The master takes samples from different portions of the batch, wanting to ensure uniformity throughout. He performs several tests, each designed to reveal different aspects of the powder's quality. The first test is visual. He spreads a small amount on a sheet of white paper and examines it in bright light. The grains should be uniform in size, with minimal dust. They should be glossy black from the graphite coating. There should be no white specks of unmixed saltpeter, no yellow patches of sulfur, no gray areas of excessive charcoal. This batch passes the visual inspection perfectly. The second test is tactile. He pours the powder from hand to hand, feeling how it flows. Good powder flows smoothly, easily like water. Poor powder clumps or sticks, indicating moisture or incomplete incorporation. He rubs a pinch between his fingers, feeling for grittiness that might indicate unmixed components. The powder feels smooth and dry, flowing beautifully, no grittiness detectable. The third test is the burn test. A small amount, perhaps a teaspoon, is placed in a small pile on a brick. The master uses a slow match, a cord treated with saltpeter solution that burns slowly and steadily to ignite the powder. Good powder should ignite quickly and burn completely in a bright flash with minimal smoke. Poor powder burns slowly or incompletely, leaving residue. The slow match touches the powder pile. Instantly, a bright flash erupts, brilliant white for a fraction of a second. A sharp crack echoes off the mill walls. A puff of white smoke rises and dissipates. The brick shows only a black scorch mark, no residue, no unburned powder. Perfect. The powder has burned completely, rapidly, exactly as it should. The fourth test is the mortar test, the same one performed earlier, but now with the finished powder. A measured charge is loaded into the test mortar, followed by wadding and lead shot. The fuse is lit. The master retreats to his observation point. The crack when the mortar fires is sharp and clean. The smoke is white and quickly disperses in the breeze. The shot flies true, striking the target board at the expected distance. The master checks the mortar bore for fouling. A light grey ash, easily wiped away, no heavy carbon deposits. The powder has performed excellently. He records all test results in his ledger. Visual inspection passed. Flow test passed. Burn test passed. Mortar test passed with shot traveling 217 paces. This batch is approved for delivery. The powder can be packed and stored. The barrels for storage are made from white oak, carefully selected for tight grain and freedom from knots. The staves have been shaped and assembled by a cooper who understands that these barrels must seal perfectly, must resist moisture, must be strong enough to withstand rough handling during transport. Each barrel holds exactly 100 pounds of powder when full. The barrels have been lined with paper, a special heavy parchment that creates an additional barrier against moisture. The powder is poured carefully, using a wooden scoop, filling the barrel slowly to avoid crushing the grains or creating dust. As each barrel fills, the powder settles with a soft susurration, grain sliding over grain, finding its level. When a barrel is full to the proper level, leaving a small air space at the top, the lid is fitted. The lid is also oak, precisely cut to fit snugly. It is not nailed in place. Nails are metal. Metal can spark. Instead, the lid is held by a wooden hoop that slides down over the barrel's rim, creating pressure that seals everything tight. Each barrel is marked with the batch number, the date of manufacture, the grain size, and the king's arrow. This arrow symbol, a broad arrow marked in black paint, indicates that this powder has been inspected and approved, that it meets the standards required for military use. Without this mark, the powder cannot be sold to the royal armories. The master applies the mark himself, using a stencil and black paint. Each arrow must be perfect, clearly visible, a guarantee of quality. This is his reputation being marked on these barrels. If the powder fails in use, if a cannon bursts or a musket misfires, the arrow mark will trace back to him. The responsibility is enormous. The pride is equally great. The finished barrels are rolled into the storage building, a sturdy structure set apart from the rest of the mill. The floor is raised on stone piers to prevent ground moisture from seeping up. The walls are thick oak planks with tar paper between the layers. The roof is slate, impervious to rain. Inside, the temperature remains relatively constant, the humidity low, the conditions ideal for long-term powder storage. The barrels are arranged in rows, organized by date and grain size. The oldest powder is stored near the door, following the principle of first in, first out. Powder does not improve with age. If anything, it slowly deteriorates, absorbing trace moisture from the air, the saltpeter gradually reacting with organic materials in the charcoal. Powder should be used within a year of manufacture when possible, within 2 years at most. The master walks between the rows, checking labels, ensuring everything is properly organized. Here sits powder made 6 months ago, waiting for the spring campaign season when armies will need to replenish their magazines. There sits powder made only last month, fresh and potent, reserved for a special order from the Royal Navy. Each barrel represents days of work, careful craft, knowledge accumulated over generations. He pauses before leaving, looking back at the rows of barrels. In the dim light filtering through small windows, they look almost innocent. Just wooden containers, sitting silently, no indication of the power they contain. But each barrel holds the potential to bring down walls, to sink ships, to change the course of battles. Inside these oak staves, behind these wooden hoops, the energy of 100 storms waits patiently to be released. The danger passes as he closes and locks the storage building door. The power is contained. The work is done. For today, at least, the mill can rest. The sun is setting as the master makes his final rounds. The workers have departed, walking down the forest path toward homes and families. The buildings are secured, doors locked, shutters fastened. The fires in the boiling room are banked, reduced to glowing coals that will be revived tomorrow. The edge runner sits silent, the horse returned to its stable. The grinding mortars are clean and empty. The screens are stacked and stored. Everything is ready for tomorrow, but tonight belongs to rest. He walks slowly through the compound, his feet following paths worn smooth by years of repetition. The smell of sulfur hangs in the evening air, but fainter now, mixing with the forest scents of pine and damp earth. Birds are settling in the trees, calling to each other as darkness approaches. The world outside the mill continues its ancient rhythms, unaware of or unconcerned with the dangerous alchemy practiced here. At the gate, he pauses and looks back. The mill buildings hunker low against the darkening sky. Smoke rises from one chimney, white and thin, carrying away the last vapors of the day's work. Somewhere a door bangs softly in the evening breeze, a gentle sound, almost peaceful. It is hard to reconcile this tranquil scene with the violence the mill produces. But that is the nature of gunpowder. Quiet until it is not. Safe until it is not. Controllable until control is lost. He locks the gate behind him and begins the walk home. The forest is growing dark, but he knows the path by heart. Every root, every stone, every place where the trail dips or turns. He has walked this path thousands of times, will walk it thousands more if fortune allows. Each step carries him away from the mill's dangers, back toward the normal world where powder is something sold and used, not made. His wife has supper waiting when he arrives. The kitchen is warm and bright, a fire crackling in the hearth, the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread. She glances at his hands, notices the new stains overlaying the old, says nothing. After 20 years, she has learned not to ask about the gray-green under his fingernails or the sulfur smell that never quite washes out of his hair. They eat in comfortable silence, the silence of two people who have lived together long enough that words are not always necessary. His mind is still partly at the mill, thinking about tomorrow's work. There are 3 barrels of saltpeter that need to be opened and tested. There is a new batch of sulfur arriving from the coast. There is an apprentice who needs instruction in the finer points of edge runner operation. The work is never truly finished. Each completed batch creates space for the next. After supper, he sits by the fire with his ledger, reviewing the day's entries. 48 pounds of finished powder produced, all tests passed. The numbers are satisfying. The profit margin on this batch will be acceptable. The king's order is being fulfilled on schedule. Everything is proceeding as it should. But he knows, has always known, that this careful order can collapse in an instant. One careless moment, one spark, one grain of sand creating friction in the wrong place at the wrong time. He has nightmares sometimes, dreams where he watches helplessly as fire races through the mill, barrel after barrel exploding in a chain reaction that leaves nothing but smoking craters. He wakes from these dreams with his heart pounding, sweat soaking his nightshirt, the sulfur smell seeming stronger than ever. His wife sleeps soundly beside him, undisturbed by his troubled rest. She has her own worries, her own concerns, but they do not include the specific terrors of powder making. She worries about their daughter's marriage prospects, about their son's education, about the cost of bread, and the weather's effect on the garden. Normal worries. Human worries. His worries are different, shaped by years of living on the edge of catastrophe. He rises before dawn the next morning, as he does every morning. The ritual of dressing, breaking his fast with bread and ale, gathering his satchel and ledger. The walk through the grey pre-dawn light, his breath visible in the cold air. The smell of sulfur growing stronger as he approaches the mill. The gate waiting to be unlocked. Another day beginning. The cycle repeats, has repeated for years, will repeat for years more, God's willing. Saltpeter crystallizing in its kettles, sulfur being ground to yellow powder, charcoal tumbling from the clamps, black and light and perfect. The 3 components coming together, being mixed and wetted and incorporated and corned. The testing and packing and storing. The barrels accumulating in the storage building, each one marked with the king's arrow, each one containing the power to reshape the world. This is the powder maker's life. Not glorious, though the product he creates enables others to achieve glory. Not celebrated, though armies and navies depend on his work. Not safe, though he takes every precaution that knowledge and experience suggest. It is a life of careful precision and constant vigilance, of technical skill and practical wisdom, of knowing that each day might be the last if fortune turns against him. But it is also a life of pride. Pride in the craft mastered over decades. Pride in maintaining standards that many others would relax. Pride in knowing that his powder is among the finest produced anywhere in the kingdom. When cannon fire in battle, when muskets crack in volleys, when mining charges bring down fortress walls, his powder performs reliably, predictably, with the consistency that only comes from uncompromising attention to detail. The apprentices watch and learn. They will carry this knowledge forward when the master finally retires or dies. They will teach their own apprentices, who will teach theirs, the chain of knowledge extending forward through generations. The specific techniques may evolve, the equipment may improve, but the fundamental principles will remain. The careful selection of materials, the precise proportioning, the thorough incorporation, the patient testing. These truths are eternal, proven by centuries of experience. The weeks pass in rhythm with the work. Batches completed, tested, packed, stored. Orders fulfilled, new orders received. The seasonal cycles affecting operations. Summer brings dry weather, ideal for powder making, when drying proceeds quickly and moisture is less of a concern. Autumn requires more caution as humidity rises and rain becomes frequent. Winter slows everything, the cold making water harder to heat, the damp pervading every process. Spring brings renewal and the rush to build inventory before campaign season. The mill itself ages with the seasons. Wood warps and must be replaced. Leather hinges wear and must be renewed. The screens gradually lose their tension and must be restretched or replaced entirely. The grinding mortars slowly wear down, their surfaces becoming rougher, requiring repolishing. Maintenance is constant, essential, the price of keeping the facility operational and safe. And always the danger lurks. Sometimes it is small incidents. A worker drops a bowl of dry powder, sending a cloud into the air, everyone freezing until it settles safely. A spark from flint and steel used carelessly outside the compound, a sharp reminder to be more vigilant. A small fire in the drying room when a lamp tips over, quickly extinguished, but terrifying nonetheless. These incidents serve as warnings, as reminders that complacency is the enemy. Sometimes the danger is more serious. A neighboring mill, 10 leagues away, explodes one summer afternoon. The sound reaches our master's mill as a distant thunder, felt more than heard. Later, travelers bring news. The entire facility destroyed. 4 workers dead. The cause unknown, perhaps a lightning strike, perhaps static electricity, perhaps simple bad luck. The master records the incident in his ledger, adds the mill to the list of facilities lost, wonders when his own mill's turn will come. But despite the danger, the work continues because it must. The kingdom needs powder. The armies require reliable supplies. The navy's ships must have their magazines filled. Mining operations, though less glamorous than military applications, create steady demand. Powder has become essential to civilization's functioning, as necessary as bread or iron or clean water. The storage building gradually fills with barrels. The rows extend deeper into the building as the season progresses. Each barrel is identical from the outside, but the master knows them individually. That barrel was from the batch where the saltpeter crystals were particularly fine. This barrel came from the week when humidity was unusually low and the drying proceeded faster than normal. Those 3 barrels represent the sulfur shipment that was delayed by storms, arriving 2 weeks late and requiring rushed processing to fulfill orders on schedule. Orders arrive by courier, sealed with noble crests and royal seals. The Duke requires 50 barrels for his castle's defense. The Admiral needs 200 barrels for the fleet's summer exercises. The king's master of ordnance demands 300 barrels for the main magazine, to be delivered before the coronation celebrations when cannon salutes will consume vast quantities. The master reviews each order, checks his inventory, calculates production schedules, sends replies promising delivery dates. Transportation is arranged. Special carts with reinforced axles and leather-wrapped wheels. Drivers who understand they are hauling the most dangerous cargo imaginable. Routes chosen to avoid unnecessary risks. Staying away from towns when possible, never traveling at night, always camping far from inhabited areas. Insurance purchased at exorbitant rates from merchants who understand the risks, but are willing to gamble for the high premiums. The barrels roll out of the storage building, loaded carefully onto carts, secured with rope lashing. The master personally inspects each load, ensuring proper weight distribution, checking that barrels are not stacked too high, verifying that nothing metal touches the barrels directly. The drivers receive final instructions. Stay on approved routes. Stop if rain threatens. Never, under any circumstances, allow fire near the cargo. Camp away from the carts at night. If anything seems wrong, send immediately for help. The carts depart down the forest track, wheels creaking, horses plodding steadily, drivers sitting alert and watchful. The master watches until they disappear among the trees. Then he turns back to the mill. The storage building is less full now, but only temporarily. New batches are already being processed. The cycle continues, endless and necessary. In quiet moments, the master sometimes reflects on the broader implications of his work. Gunpowder has changed warfare fundamentally. The age of armored knights and castle fortifications is ending. Cannon can breach walls that previously would have withstood siege for months. Musket-armed infantry can defeat cavalry charges that would have been unstoppable a century ago. The balance of power has shifted from those with the most steel to those with the most powder. This shift troubles him sometimes. He is not a warrior, has never fought in battle, yet his product kills more men than any sword or lance. Is he responsible for those deaths? Are his hands stained with blood as well as sulfur? He has wrestled with these questions for years, found no satisfactory answers. In the end, he takes refuge in the belief that he is merely a craftsman. He makes a product. What others do with it is their responsibility, not his. But the questions linger, especially at night when sleep is elusive and the darkness seems heavy with unasked accusations. The faces of men he has never met, will never meet, who have died because powder from his mill performed exactly as intended. The walls that have crumbled, the buildings that have burned, the ships that have sunk, all consequences of his careful craft. Yet he continues, because the work provides for his family, because he has spent his life mastering this dangerous art and knows nothing else, because stopping would not stop the demand for powder, would merely shift production to other mills, other craftsmen who might be less careful, less skilled, more willing to cut corners for profit. If powder must be made, better it be made well, made safely, made by someone who understands and respects its power. The years accumulate like the powder in barrels. The master grows older, his hands more stained, his hair grayer, his back stiffer from years of bending over grinding mortars and mixing tables. His apprentices are nearly ready to take over. He has taught them everything he knows, every technique refined through decades of practice, every warning learned through near disasters and observed catastrophes. One day, perhaps soon, he will retire, will hand the mill over to his senior apprentice, a capable man who has worked beside him for 15 years, will walk away from the sulfur smell and the constant danger, will try to live a normal life in his remaining years. But he wonders if he will ever truly escape. The smell has sunk so deep into his skin and hair and lungs that it seems permanent. The habits of vigilance, the constant awareness of risk, the automatic calculations of proportions and processes, all have become part of who he is. For now, though, the work continues. The mill operates through another season, another year. Saltpeter crystallizes, Sulfur is ground. Charcoal is formed and pulverized. The three components merge into black grains that flow like water and explode like thunder. The barrels accumulate, are shipped, return empty to be filled again. And through it all, the master maintains his standards. 75 parts saltpeter, 15 parts charcoal, 10 parts sulfur, measured precisely, mixed thoroughly, incorporated completely, corned carefully, dried patiently, tested rigorously. Every batch receiving the same attention, the same care, the same commitment to quality that has marked his entire career. The evening comes again, as it does every day. The workers depart. The buildings are secured. The fires are banked. The master makes his rounds, checking everything one final time. The storage building holds 23 barrels now, waiting for tomorrow's shipment to the naval dockyard. Each barrel weighs 100 pounds. Each barrel contains enough power to sink a ship or breach a wall. Each barrel is marked with the king's arrow, the master's guarantee of quality. He locks the storage building door, tests it to ensure it is secure. The danger is contained. The power is safely stored. The mill can rest until morning brings another day of careful, dangerous work. The walk home is familiar, comfortable despite the growing darkness. The forest sounds are peaceful. An owl calls from a nearby oak. Small animals rustle in the undergrowth. The wind moves through the branches with a sound like distant ocean waves. All normal, all safe, all far removed from the volatile materials sleeping in their barrels behind locked doors. His wife has kept supper warm. They eat together, talking of small domestic matters. The leaking roof that needs repair before winter. The daughter's upcoming wedding. The son's progress in his studies. Normal family concerns, the fabric of ordinary life. The master participates in these conversations, but part of his mind remains at the mill, running through tomorrow's schedule, planning the week's production, thinking about the batch currently drying, wondering if the grain size will be acceptable. After supper, he updates his ledger by lamplight. 23 barrels in storage. 48 barrels shipped this month. Materials inventory adequate for another 3 weeks of production. New sulfur shipment expected next Tuesday. The numbers tell the story of the mill's operation, reducing complex processes to simple arithmetic. Pounds and barrels and dates, the record of powder transformed from raw materials into finished product. He closes the ledger and extinguishes the lamp. Time for sleep, though sleep often comes slowly, disturbed by dreams of fire and explosion, of walls collapsing and ships burning. The price of working daily with such dangerous materials. The burden of knowledge that every batch he produces will be used to destroy something, to harm someone, to change the world in ways he cannot predict or control. But in the morning he will rise again, will walk again to the mill, will unlock the gates and begin another day of careful craft, because this is his life, this is his skill, this is what he knows and what he does. The medieval gunpowder maker, standing at the intersection of chemistry and violence, knowledge and danger, tradition and innovation. The powder waits in its barrels, silent, stable, patient, the energy of 1,000 storms contained in black grains, separated from disaster only by careful handling and wooden walls. Tomorrow, some of those barrels will leave, beginning their journey to wherever powder is needed. And the master will begin producing more, continuing the cycle that has defined his life. The mill sleeps, the forest is quiet. The stars emerge in the darkening sky, distant and cold and eternal. And in the storage building, behind locked doors, the barrels sit in their neat rows, each one identical, each one marked with the king's arrow, each one holding power carefully gathered and precisely prepared. The danger passes into sleep, the work is done. Tomorrow will bring more of the same, but for now this day is complete. The powder is made, the barrels are full, the records are updated, everything is secure. And as the barrels sit silently in the dark, holding the potential energy of 1,000 storms, the danger passes. The work is done. Sleep well.